Procurement is more than a buzzword. It's a process that defines how projects are built and ultimately how successful they become. At its core, procurement is about obtaining services, most often an owner hiring a contractor to bring the project to life. But while the term may sound straightforward, the way it's executed can make or break a project. In this episode of OCS Talks, we look at today's construction landscape and the default approach to accepting the lowest bid under the illusion that this equals savings. Recently, there's been a lot of talk around the belief that more bids means better prices. And from a taxpayer accountability perspective, it kind of makes sense. The thought is more bidders means more competition and lower prices. While competition is important, price alone tells us nothing about quality, compliance, safety, or a contractor's actual ability to deliver on that price.
Welcome to OCS Talks, your source for all things related to Ontario's unionized ICI construction sector.
I'm Brian Barron, CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat, and joining me today is Bob Ritzmann of Energize Ontario. To say Bob has a lot of experience working with owners to deliver a successful project is an understatement. Bob has made a career of not only starting successful construction businesses here in Ontario, but in Africa as well. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brian. Glad to be on with you today. It's, I just look back on my notes and I see that, for the last 20 years, I've been coming to the OCS State of the Construction Industry Conference every March or so. And it's exciting for me to be on with you here today.
Well, thank you. And we like having you at the conference. So before we get started, I think I really haven't done you any justice at all in my introduction. So to put it frankly, like you and I met about a year ago, I was blown away when you told me about the businesses that you've started, owned, built, and sold. Can you kind of briefly walk our listeners through your career and that'll eventually lead into why I've got you here on the podcast?
Well, sure, Brian. First of all, I have to say, people have been very generous and kind to me in giving me a lot of opportunity. And I've had great teams to work with. So it's certainly not all my doing. I really appreciate those that I've been able to work with. I started my career as an electrical apprentice straight out of high school. And something I would absolutely recommend and encourage anyone to consider. It doesn't have to be electrical. Mine was electrical, but any of the trades are really good. I worked for a company called Nichols Radke in the beginning. They're now Aecon, one of the largest or perhaps the largest construction company in Canada. They gave me a lot of opportunity. I stayed there for about 15 years, did my apprenticeship, and got through to being doing estimating and project managing. I was given an opportunity at a new business called Trademark in Kitchener and joined them for about 10 years. Went over to Sutherland Schultz for a couple of years, also in Cambridge area here. And then I looked at things and I said, well, I'm 45. If I'm going to do my own business, I better do it now. So at 45, back in 2011, we began All Trade Industrial Contractors. It got off the ground very quickly, far more quickly than we ever anticipated, but had great people to work with and was able to sell it. That was our plan right from day one. And we were able to sell it, and I retired in 2023 from All Trade. And since then, I've been working with Energize Ontario, doing business development for the Electrical Contractors Association. And the other half of my time is spent going back and forth to Zambia, Africa, building schools there. Our organization is called Life Song for Orphans. I'm the chair there. And actually tomorrow I get on a plane to go there, and we're commissioning a 15 megawatt solar farm, our first that we've built now in Africa. So really looking forward to that.
So to sum it up, you've got a bit of experience dealing with owners. You've got a bit of experience dealing with sort of contracts, that kind of stuff. So I want to jump back to procurement. So at the OCS, we do a lot of research. And over the years, we've looked at best practices on responsible procurement in various different ways. But also recently, we've taken a deep dive into publicly funded projects and how they're awarded. The results, quite honestly, are pretty staggering. So we found when looking at the different sites for publicly tendered bids that 97% were awarded to the lowest bidder. Now, in my intro, I alluded to why this is probably the preferred method, and ultimately it comes down to two really significant factors. So the first one being having the resources and capacity to truly examine the bid and the associated contractor to understand what you're really getting for the money. And this ultimately comes down to kind of the experience within government organizations who are evaluating these contracts and whether or not they have the ability to effectively go through each one of those and really understand it. But the second really comes down to transparency to the taxpayer through spending the lowest amount of money on a project. And this second item seems to be kind of reasonable on the surface when you think about it. So except for the fact that we know this promotes predatory bidding, it ultimately attracts contractors looking for ways to either perform the work very cheaply or looking for opportunities to escalate the cost through extras. Unfortunately, this has created an environment where quality contractors are really hesitant to bid because they know that the project is likely going to the lowest bidder. And as you know, putting a bid in, submitting a bid, looking at bonding capacity, everything else really kind of ties up that contractor, and there's a cost to that. So really, why take that risk if you know it's going to that lowest bidder? But to add to this, it distorts the true value of construction, which under this methodology will most certainly see significant increases in the final cost of construction, which I'm not sure everybody always hears about. You hear about the really big ones out there where contracts have really gone south, but some of the other ones, that final cost, you never really hear about. So before we get into the relationship side between the contractor and the owner, I'd love your thoughts on that low bid mentality.
Low bid mentality. That's a hard one for good contractors to really swallow to a large degree. To me, having a good project always comes down to relationship. And I hope that people at least are pre-qualifying contractors. But as a contractor, when we looked at bidding a project, we always had a go, no-go bid meeting before we started bidding. And there's a couple questions that are always asked. And one of the questions is, what is this customer like? What is their track record? Do they always go with low bid, or is it a relationship that we have with them? There is a lot of opportunity to bid all kinds of things, but you're just going to lose money if you bid everything. And so it always comes down to that you're looking to bid the best projects, and the best ones, quite frankly, are those where there is a fixed number of bidders, not an open-ended number of bidders, and also where there's relationships that are formed, and that the customer is looking to work with a contractor that is going to give them that quality and that safety. Safety is not something that we should just ignore. Look at the track record that people have, and it will tell you probably what will happen on your job moving forward.
And I'm glad you brought up pre-qualification. We will certainly get to that side of it. And I'm also glad that you brought up sort of the safety side. Having come from the Ministry of Labor and spent 20 years there, looking at, a company's dedication to something like health and safety, and there's other examples of this as well. You've got environment, you've got all sorts of different sort of measures that are out there. But when you look at that dedication to it, what it does is it speaks a lot to the culture of a company and really understanding sort of the fact that they're looking at more than just the money. They're looking at their people, they're looking at the quality, they're looking at all those different pieces. So one of the things that really stuck out to me a year ago when you and I spoke was your comments around sort of that trust and the importance of a strong and mutually beneficial relationship between the owner and the contractor. On the surface, this makes sense, but I think the reality is a little bit different in some cases, especially when you're dealing with some of those lower value projects. I mean, it's quite often that we'll see pre-qualification systems in place when we're looking at some of those mega projects, but when we're getting into some of the smaller municipal type projects, I'm not sure it's as common. But I think the reality comes down to, people understand the benefit of that trusting relationship. But when faced with a below market value bid and the pressure for fiscal responsibility, because it's no secret that when we're dealing with government projects right now, that dollar amount is very, very important. People are trying to hold governments accountable, make sure they're not overspending and that sort of stuff. So What would you say to a project owner who is looking at that low bid and thinking they're going to roll the dice, basically, and abandon the relationship built on trust for a contractor willing to do the job below market value?
At the end of the day, it's not just that initial price that you should be looking at. It's the full cost of that project. And I think the statistics show very clearly that, if somebody takes on a job and they're too low, and that happens, people forget things. I hope they don't do it on purpose, but there are some characters out there that might even do that. But if you take on a project too low, you're just looking for every opportunity to make up that shortfall. Businesses, contractors are in business to make money. Hopefully a reasonable amount and a fair amount. But yet, when you know that you're going into something and your number is too low, either that you've forgotten something, and that happens more often than not. These are tight window frames for bidding, and so if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, Bob, you're really low on this. Take a look at your number," I wouldn't even consider doing the job, because there's something that I've missed. And, I don't want to get into that kind of a relationship with an owner because it's just going to be a fight. And at the end of the day, if it has to go legal, you're going to more than pay for this project if you would have just considered perhaps one of the middle prices.
So I just recently read a report on this, and they were talking about different ways to look at this. And it was all leading towards pre-qualification, but before you get there, it was looking at sort of that median bid price. So ultimately it's, the best practice used to kind of be you'd throw out the lowest, you'd throw out the highest, because the lowest, they clearly made a mistake, or they're doing something a bit nefarious. The highest is they probably don't really want the job, but if they get it, it's going to be worthwhile, kind of thing. So you're looking at the middle bids, you average those ones out, and you pick the one that's closest to what that average is. And that's sort of generally seen, and I think there's probably exceptions to this, but generally seen as the true market value of that particular project. And I think that, when you take a look at that and use that as sort of a gauge, it at least gets you closer to where you should have been on it, which I think is probably for say a smaller municipality and that sort of stuff who lacks the capacity or resources to really evaluate bids appropriately. That's probably a reasonable way to start. There are some challenges to that as well, which kind of brings me to my next thing that I want to talk about, which is pre-qualification. So, when you look at procurement, a lot of people think of that as just sort of it's the way to obtain the services, but pre-qualification is ultimately the way that you do it responsibly. It's the objective way to sort of measure those things out. My view on this is you simply can't pick the right contractor without understanding their culture, their qualifications, their leadership, and ultimately their track record. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on pre-qualification versus low or that median bid selection.
Look, I think pre-qualification is really important. Usually, a track record is there and it will be repeated over and over again. We've seen numerous projects where there is a track record of a contractor that was not good. And sure enough, the next project was, went kind of the same route. Pre-qualification is takes into account those other factors, safety, previous projects, experience, your project management staff. One of the things I'll say, that we always did in our go no go bid process in that meeting, one of the very first questions was, who's going to run this project? It's really important that we have the right people running these projects and that we have a plan for that ahead of time, not just kind of a fly by night. Let's figure this out on the go process, because those are dangerous projects to get into from a contractor's point of view. And whenever a contractor is in trouble, the project will be in trouble. The cost will go up. There will be things that everybody will look for to charge extra because they're trying to make up the difference, and somewhat rightly so, in the fact that things change on a project. if you have enough in your bid, those little things that change, there's some give and take. But when there's no room for give and take, the project cost will go up.
Yeah, it's funny. I look at the number of jobs that I've done. I've built a few hospitals, wastewater treatment facilities, that kind of thing. And honestly, I mean, a lot of the time we were getting plans that weren't complete. Like, we didn't have the roofs designed yet. We didn't have anything like that. So you're really kind of, there's a bit of guesswork in the estimation. So you're adding in a margin there for some room for movement in it. But I think that is also one of the fundamental problems that we're dealing with today is everybody wants something very quickly. And when they're using sort of that thought process around this kind of thing, what you end up with is incomplete drawings, which automatically puts the contractor sort of a bit behind the eight ball in being able to accurately bid a project. Now, in terms of, when we take a look at kind of that median bid, and I know, I've spoken at AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and, when I've spoken with mayors of towns, they go, no, Brian, we 100% understand that low bid is the problem kind of thing. Like, we just don't know how to kind of get past that. And when we talk about sort of that median bid selection, they go, yeah, no, we understand that, but how do we justify it? And I honestly think that pre-qualification is really the only responsible way to do this, because it objectively gives you sort of the criteria that you're able to actually prove why one contractor is more qualified than another. But then there's also this risk side and the culture side. I think it's important that the culture of the contractor matches up with the culture of the owner. There's got to be some sort of match up there so that they understand one another a little bit more. But I do want to talk about this risk side of things a little bit. So when we look at hiring a quality contractor, first and foremost in my mind, you're getting somebody who's qualified. They have the skill, they've got the capacity to deliver the product that hopefully will last for years to come. Hopefully it's got a great warranty that comes with it and that sort of stuff. And they're using quality products as part of that. But it also comes down to a piece that I don't think enough project owners spend enough time thinking about, and it's that risk mitigation side of things. So when you hire a qualified contractor, they're not only looking out for that bottom line, and let's call it what it is. I mean, everybody's in this to make money and that sort of stuff. So that's obviously a driving part of this. But they're also looking out for their workers, which I think is very important. They're looking out for the project owner and their best interests, but they're also looking out for the public in how they build. And there's been sort of recent examples of where this has gone a little bit south. The city of Sudbury, unfortunately, got drawn into a fatality investigation with one of their paving projects where, unfortunately, one of their citizens was run over by a construction vehicle. And all of it came back to, the contractor who came in did not do a very good job of controlling traffic, keeping the public away from the actual project itself. The city of Sudbury had to get involved, which then put them in the position of becoming an employer. So a place that they never wanted to be. They hired a constructor to do the job. That constructor failed to do certain things. They stepped in, started hiring their own police force, directing where barriers had to go and that sort of stuff, which put them into this position of becoming an employer. Now, in the end of all of it, they were, those charges were dropped against them as an employer, but it had to go through the Supreme Court. It had to go through numerous other provincial courts to get to that point. But they ended up taking a tremendous amount of risk in doing that. There's a huge cost that goes along with that. So what are your thoughts on the risk to an owner and that relationship between how they select who actually builds their job?
Well, Brian, you mentioned culture, and I'm going to say that's a huge issue and an important one to look at. It was more important for me to hire people that had the right culture than that they had all of the skill sets. And I think a lot of contractors will look at those kinds of things. I used to tell people, hey, do the job so that we can go take pictures of this. We want to use this to be able to sell ourselves to the next project. Don't take shortcuts, and for sure, please don't take any shortcuts on safety. You're not doing me, you're not doing anybody a favor if you're taking shortcuts on safety. And it's those kinds of things. That's what creates the culture in a company. And those are the companies that will look after not only their people, they'll look after the customer, because they want their reputation to precede them, quite frankly. And so that's what it takes when you're doing your pre-qualification. You're looking for those kinds of things. And I would recommend, don't just go by what even the literature says for a company. Go and talk to their people. Go talk to go talk to the apprentice if you're able to. Anybody, if the culture is right in a company, it will permeate all the way through.
It's interesting. So, I mentioned before that I was with the Ministry of Labor, and culture was always one of these, it was kind of elusive in some areas. And I was constantly asked, being the head of the construction health and safety program, and being compared against sort of the industrial or mining or healthcare programs and that sort of stuff. And they were going like, well, why is culture in construction so different? And, there's some really significant challenges when we take a look at construction. It's not, the Ford Motor Company. It's not, a large steel mill. It's not a hospital, where it's largely a static environment where you can turn around and put something in place, and it remains largely in place for a very long period of time, and where you can study really every aspect of it. In construction, we are dealing with an environment that changes minute by minute. So, guardrails are put up, they're taken down, workers are tying off, they're unhooking, they're doing all of these other things constantly throughout the day. And that commitment to that culture, that commitment to health and safety is, it has to be very intentional. It's not something that just happens. It's not something that you take for granted. It has to come right from the top all the way down to your most junior laborer on site, and has to be a belief that they live by. And I think that is very telling to a project owner when they take a look at somebody's health and safety record as to whether or not this is somebody that's going to be looking out for the details on the project, because all of those same skills really translate over into that spec adherence and that detail to actual quality building. And I don't think people always kind of line those pieces up. They don't really understand that side of it and how intentional it has to be in construction. It doesn't just happen, and I think that's something that people need to spend a lot of time thinking about. One of the things that I did want to talk to you about, it was something that you brought up with me, and it was the first time I had actually heard of this. And I've been out of sort of the building world for a little while, but I certainly have built some large hospitals and that sort of stuff. And it was something that intrigued me. And, we spoke a little bit about integrated project delivery contract models, which kind of, it threw me for a bit of a loop, because it doesn't seem very intuitive to me, but it strikes me as something that is kind of an interesting thought for folks. And it's really a model that essentially helps to share the risk and reward on projects between all parties. This being very new to me, it is something that does strike me as something that could help with the relationship between the owners and the contractors, and helps to sort of almost incentivize quality building and kind of keeping up that relationship. So can you walk us through how that works and ultimately what the advantages are?
Sure. To the best I can, I will. I've been out of it for 3 years now, but we certainly saw IPD construction coming into Ontario in a much stronger way, than ever before. I got introduced to this probably 10, 15 years ago. We went to some projects out in California to review them, and they were using this methodology. And to a large degree, it's good for projects where the engineering is not complete right up front. And, we're living in a very fast track world today. Our projects are getting more and more, going very quickly. There isn't enough time, you mentioned that earlier, for some of the engineering even to be complete. And so when we're seeing, scopes of work come to us that are 15 or 20% complete on drawings, and you're trying to put a price together, that's very difficult, because the amount of contingency that has to be put into place is huge then. And that may make the project, not be able to get off the ground, because just people are putting contingency on contingencies. Integrated project development is the concept where you negotiate a fixed markup on the project, and the whole job is done open book. There are some aspects of it that are fixed costs, your overheads, your site costs, a number of different things like this. But the rest of the job, the owner and the contractor are at the same table, figuring out what is the best way to move forward. The engineer is as part of that team as well. Sometimes and often the engineer actually reports to the contractor rather than the owner, so that they can figure out the constructability of things as quick as possible. The general contracting methodology, you're almost put at odds with your owner right away. The owner is looking to get the very most amount of work done for the least amount of cost. And the contractor, quite frankly, is trying to make the most money and do the least amount of work. That's how he can only make money. And so, this method puts both of you at the same table, and then when there is savings at the end, it's shared between the owner and the contractor. And it forces the parties to work together. Each one of them has opportunity to save money sometimes. And if there's an incentive there, it really drives that price down. And, the scope of work is figured out very quickly. There was a large project done down in Windsor a number of years ago, and it just finished up. And, the project finished with the owner and the contractor being friends with each other. That rarely happens on a large project these days.
It's funny. It brings to mind sort of that triangle, the time, cost, quality kind of thing. You can only have two kind of deal. And this sort of seems like a nice sort of balance between them. And I recognize this probably isn't a model for every project that is out there for sure.
That's right.
But it's certainly something that people can kind of work towards. But I think they do need to have sort of an advanced knowledge as to kind of how some of this stuff works, so that everybody is on the same page for sure. So Bob, last question I've got for you here. So, we're going to be going. So last year we went to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference. We spoke to, oh boy, I don't know. I think it was about 200 of the municipalities. And then I met with them again at their trade and tariff conference that they had in Toronto, where I spoke to them. And, there were a lot of challenges that were out there. I mean, you can understand. So, City of Toronto, City of London, City of Ottawa, Hamilton, that sort of stuff. They're much larger municipalities. They probably have more advanced procurement divisions and that kind of stuff. But the fact is most municipalities in Ontario are quite small. They're very, very small. They've only got maybe a few people who are actually in City Hall that work on procurement and construction contracts and that sort of stuff. What would you say to them about procurement? What kind of direction would you point them in to try and get them set on the right path? Because this can be very overwhelming for them. What would your advice be to them?
Yeah, I think number one is pre-qualification, and understand who the contractors are out there that have the experience, that can do this kind of work. Everybody has to try something new, and we want to give opportunity for some new contractors as well, but maybe this isn't the project for them to learn on. Let them have a track record a little bit first. Get a relationship going with these contractors long before projects are done. And that's a really important part of this, so that you can develop that trust, so that when you go out to your 3 or 4 contractors that are going to bid this project, you're getting people that are qualified to do this work and are interested in this work, and will put, their best foot forward to get this done. They got the right culture to ensure that, the work will be done safely, that no one will get hurt. I always told people, I want you to go home at the end of the day the same way that you came, maybe a little bit happier that you got a paycheck, you got paid to do your work today. It's really important that no one gets hurt on these projects, because that reflects, not only on the contractor, but the customer here as well.
Yeah. You know what I mean? The goal with all of these things, and I think any project that's out there, you want it to go off without a hitch, without any, major issues to the people, property, anything like that. I mean, it's bottom line is we're trying to put buildings up there. It's not at all cost. It's, it's turning around and saying, now we're doing this responsibly. So Bob, with that, I'd like to thank you for coming on the podcast. So I brought Bob on today to help highlight the importance of hiring the right contractor for your project, not just the cheapest one. Project success is not defined by simply completing a project. It's building a quality project designed to last, with all parties maintaining a strong and positive relationship. Unfortunately, the common standard these days revolves around trying to build something as cheap as possible, which unfortunately results in poor quality and litigation in a lot of cases, and nobody really wants to be there. I hope today's podcast has been helpful in highlighting the importance of doing your homework on the contractors you hire, as well as understanding what the true market price of construction actually is. I'd like to thank Bob Ritzmann and Energize Ontario for their time today on OCS Talks. For more information on today's podcast and resources from the Ontario Construction Secretariat, visit our website at iciconstruction.com and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Ontario Construction Secretariat. Knowledge to build on. Visit iciconstruction.com to learn more.